The laughter came
I
out
cannot
before
believe
Sarah
they're
could
doing
stop
that.
it. She slapped a hand over her mouth, but the
Seriously,
damage was
who told
already
them that was a good
done.
idea?
"Oh my God," she whispered to the woman beside her. "Look at his legs." The woman followed Sarah's gaze. A tall middle-aged man was walking across the waiting area carrying a folder. His legs were unusually thin. Sarah smirked. "They look like chicken legs." The woman tried not to laugh. Sarah leaned closer. "Seriously, is he okay? He looks like the wind could knock him over." A few nearby candidates overheard. Chuckles spread across the room. The man paused for a moment, just a moment, long enough for Sarah to realize he had heard every word. He turned. Their eyes met. Sarah expected anger. Instead, he smiled politely. Then he continued walking. "Weird," Sarah muttered. The woman beside her laughed. At least he didn't hear. "Oh, he definitely heard." The woman froze. "Then why is he smiling?" Sarah shrugged. "Probably because he works here and needs the job." The entire room was packed with candidates. Everyone wanted the same position: regional operations manager, a role that paid more money than Sarah had ever imagined earning. For her, this wasn't just another interview. It was her chance to change everything. Her father had spent months looking for work. Her younger brother had dropped out of school temporarily because the family couldn't afford certain fees. The pressure was enormous, and Sarah had convinced herself that she deserved the position more than anyone else. She had the degree, she had the confidence, she had the ambition. In her mind, the job was already hers. "Candidates, please take your seats." The receptionist entered the room. Immediately, everyone straightened up. The atmosphere changed. Nervous energy filled the room. Sarah adjusted her blazer. This was it. The receptionist smiled. "Thank you all for coming today." Nobody spoke. Everyone waited. "We are about to begin." Sarah glanced around. She noticed several interview panel chairs at the front. One chair remained empty, probably for the CEO. Sarah imagined some wealthy executive arriving in an expensive suit surrounded by assistants. Someone powerful, someone intimidating, someone successful. The receptionist looked toward the entrance. The door opened. Footsteps echoed across the room. Sarah turned. The smile disappeared from her face. The folder-carrying man walked inside. He moved directly toward the empty chair. The room became silent. A horrible feeling settled inside Sarah's stomach. No way. The receptionist beamed. "Please welcome our founder and CEO." Sarah's heart stopped. The room erupted into applause. The man took his seat calmly. Sarah couldn't clap. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The woman beside her looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her. "No," Sarah whispered. The CEO adjusted his microphone. "Good morning, everyone." His voice was calm, confident, the voice of a man completely comfortable in his own skin. "My name is Daniel Brooks." Sarah felt heat rising into her face. The CEO, the founder, the owner of the company, the man she had mocked less than 5 minutes ago, the man who had heard every word. She wanted to disappear. Daniel continued speaking. "We received over 2,000 applications." Several candidates exchanged nervous glances. "Only 20 people made it to this final stage." Sarah tried to focus, but her thoughts were racing. Did he remember? Of course he remembered. Would he throw her out immediately? Would he embarrass her in front of everyone? Would security escort her from the building? Her hands trembled beneath the table. Daniel looked around the room. His gaze passed over every candidate. When his eyes reached Sarah, they lingered briefly. Not angry, not hostile, just observant. Then he continued. "Today's interview is not only about qualifications." The room listened carefully. "We can teach skills." Sarah swallowed. "We can train employees." Her chest tightened. "But character—" He paused. "Character is much harder to build." Sarah felt like those words were aimed directly at her. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that one moment can change everything. The interviews began. Candidate after candidate stepped forward. Some performed well, Others struggled. One applicant bragged constantly about his achievements. Daniel listened patiently, then asked a simple question. What was your biggest professional failure? The candidate froze. Another candidate claimed she was a natural leader. Daniel asked her to describe a time she admitted being wrong. She couldn't answer. One by one, candidates stumbled. Hours passed. Finally, Sarah's name was called. Her pulse exploded. She stood slowly. Every step toward the front felt heavier than the last. She sat across from Daniel. The entire panel watched. Daniel folded his hands. Sarah, yes, sir. You have an impressive academic record. Thank you. Top of your class? Yes, sir. He nodded. And strong recommendations. Sarah felt a small spark of hope. Maybe he wasn't going to mention it. Maybe she still had a chance. For 20 minutes, the interview went surprisingly well. She answered every question confidently. The panel members seemed impressed. Even Daniel occasionally nodded. As the conversation continued, Sarah began relaxing. Maybe she had overreacted. Maybe he truly didn't care about the comment. Maybe... Daniel suddenly leaned forward. The room became quiet. His expression remained calm. Sarah? Yes, sir? I have one final question. Her stomach dropped. Something in his voice had changed. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Daniel looked directly into her eyes. How do you treat people when you believe they have nothing to offer you? Every sound disappeared. Every movement stopped. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear herself think. She knew exactly what he was asking, and for the first time that day, she had no answer. Sarah stared at Daniel. The question hung in the air. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Every candidate in the room seemed to understand there was more behind that question than appeared on the surface. Her mouth felt dry. I try to treat everyone with respect. The words sounded weak even to her own ears. Daniel didn't interrupt. He simply waited. Sarah felt her confidence slipping away. A few hours ago, she would have answered any question without hesitation. Now she could barely think. Daniel finally spoke. Do you always succeed? The question hit harder than the first one. Sarah lowered her eyes. No. The room remained silent. Daniel nodded slowly. No one does. For a brief moment, Sarah thought he might let her off the hook. Instead, he leaned back in his chair. Tell me about a time you failed. The knot in her stomach tightened. A normal answer would be easy. She could talk about a missed deadline, a failed project, a poor grade. But she knew that wasn't what he meant. He was giving her a choice. Lie, or tell the truth. Sarah could feel every eye in the room on her, the panel members, the candidates, the receptionist, everyone. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Then she took a deep breath and made a decision. This morning. The room froze. Daniel's expression didn't change. Sarah continued. I failed this morning. A few candidates shifted uncomfortably. Sarah swallowed hard. I judged someone based on appearance. Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. The silence became almost unbearable. Sarah forced herself to continue. I made assumptions about someone I didn't know. Her voice trembled, and I said something disrespectful. The woman who had laughed beside her stared at the floor. Sarah knew exactly why. Because she wasn't the only guilty person. She was simply the only one admitting it. Daniel remained calm. What made you judge that person? Sarah hesitated, then answered honestly. Pride. The word shocked even her. She had never admitted that before. Not to anyone, not even herself. Daniel nodded. Go on. Sarah looked around the room. She saw candidates avoiding eye contact. She saw people who had laughed, people who had agreed with her, people who had remained silent. I thought successful people were supposed to look a certain way. Her voice cracked. I thought appearances told me everything I needed to know. Daniel folded his hands. And what do you think now? Sarah looked directly at him. I think I was wrong. The room remained silent, painfully silent. Daniel studied her for several seconds. Then he thanked her. Just thanked her. Nothing more. No lecture, no humiliation, no punishment. Thank you for your honesty, Sarah. The interview ended. Sarah returned to her seat. Her legs felt weak. She had never been more embarrassed in her life, but strangely, she also felt relieved. The truth was out. There was nothing left to hide. The interviews continued, yet Sarah barely heard any of them. Her mind replayed everything that had happened. Every word, every laugh, every terrible decision. Hours later, the final candidate finished. Daniel stood. The room instantly became attentive. Everyone expected him to announce the results. Instead, he surprised them. "I'd like to tell you a story." The candidates exchanged glances. Nobody expected that. Daniel walked slowly toward the center of the room. "When people meet me for the first time, many notice my legs." Sarah felt her face burn. Several people looked uncomfortable. Daniel continued anyway. "When I was 23 years old, I became seriously ill." The room grew quiet. Doctors weren't sure I'd walk properly again. Nobody moved. Daniel's voice remained steady. "There were surgeries." He paused. "Years of therapy." Another pause. "Pain I wouldn't wish on anyone." Sarah could barely look at him, but she forced herself to listen, because for the first time she wanted to understand. Not judge, understand. Daniel smiled faintly. The physical pain wasn't the hardest part. The room listened carefully. It was watching people change. A candidate frowned. "What do you mean, sir?" Daniel nodded. "A good question." He looked around the room. "When I was healthy, people respected me." He paused. "When I became weak, many disappeared." The room became even quieter. Friends stopped calling. Business partners stopped believing in me. Some people treated me like I was broken. Sarah felt something twist inside her chest. Daniel wasn't angry. That somehow made it worse. He was simply telling the truth. "The illness taught me something." He looked around the room. "You learn who people really are when they think you can do nothing for them." Nobody spoke. Daniel continued. "When I eventually recovered enough to work again, I started a business." Several candidates nodded. Everyone knew the company's success story, or at least they thought they did. What they didn't know was how difficult the beginning had been. Daniel laughed softly. "My first office wasn't an office." A few people smiled. "It was a tiny apartment." The room chuckled. "I had one desk." Another laugh. "One chair." More laughter. "And a computer so old it crashed every 30 minutes. The tension eased slightly. Then Daniel's expression grew serious again. "But the hardest part wasn't money." The room fell silent. "It wasn't competition." Another pause. "It wasn't failure." Sarah listened carefully. "It was convincing people not to judge me before I opened my mouth." Those words hit the room like a hammer. Daniel wasn't looking at Sarah anymore. He was looking at everyone, every candidate, every panel member, every employee, everyone, because the lesson wasn't only for her, it was for all of them. If this story is teaching you something, take a second right now to like the video and comment below. Have you ever judged someone too quickly? Be honest. Daniel took a deep breath. Then he said something that nobody expected. "In fact," he smiled slightly, "I still test people." The room looked confused. Sarah frowned. "Test people? What did that mean?" A candidate raised his hand. "What kind of test?" Daniel's smile widened. "The kind that happened this morning." The room went completely silent. Every candidate froze. Every face turned pale. Sarah felt her heart stop, because suddenly, everyone realized the interview had started long before they entered the interview room. The room exploded with tension. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. Every candidate was replaying the morning in their mind, every conversation, every joke, every comment, every assumption. Daniel let the silence linger. Then he continued. "People spend weeks preparing for interviews." His voice remained calm. "They rehearse answers." He smiled. "They research companies." A few candidates nodded. "They practice confidence." Another pause. But very few prepare for the moments they think don't matter. The room was completely still. Daniel looked around. The receptionist. He pointed toward the front. The security guard. Another pause. The cleaner. He glanced toward the doorway. The employee carrying a folder. Sarah felt another wave of embarrassment crash into her. Daniel continued. Those moments reveal far more than interview answers ever could. Nobody disagreed, because everybody knew he was right. One candidate slowly raised his hand. Sir, Daniel nodded. Yes? Were you testing us the whole time? A faint smile crossed Daniel's face. Not exactly. The room waited. I was simply observing. He folded his hands. I wanted to see who you were when you thought nobody important was watching. Those words landed heavily, because everyone understood what he meant. Character wasn't something you switched on during an interview. Character was who you were all the time. Sarah sat quietly. The shame was still there, but something else had joined it. Understanding. For the first time in her life, she realized how many people she had judged, how many assumptions she had made, how many opportunities she might have damaged without even realizing it. Daniel thanked everyone for attending. The interviews officially ended. No winner was announced. No clues were given. The candidates slowly left the building. Sarah walked out feeling emotionally exhausted. The woman who had sat beside her caught up with her outside. Sarah! Sarah stopped. The woman looked nervous. I should apologize. Sarah frowned. For what? The woman looked down. For laughing. Sarah sighed. We both laughed. Still, the woman shook her head. You were brave enough to admit it. Sarah gave a sad smile. I wasn't brave. Yes, you were. The woman paused. Most people would have lied. Sarah didn't know what to say, because the truth was she had almost lied, several times. The two women said goodbye and went their separate ways. The following days felt endless. Sarah checked her email constantly. Every notification made her heart race. Every phone vibration made her nervous. 3 days later, the message finally arrived. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Unfortunately, we have decided to move forward with other candidates. Sarah stared at the screen. A strange calm settled over her. She wasn't surprised. Disappointed? Of course. But surprised? No. She had made a mistake, a serious one. Actions had consequences. She accepted that. For several minutes she sat quietly. Then she closed the email and moved on. Or at least she tried to. Hours later her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost ignored it. Something told her not to. Hello? Good afternoon. Is this Sarah? Yes. This is Human Resources from Brooks Enterprises. Her heart skipped. She sat upright. Okay. We'd like you to come into the office tomorrow morning. Sarah frowned. Why? I'm afraid I can't discuss that over the phone. Her stomach tightened. Am I in trouble? The woman laughed softly. No. Then what is this about? I'm sorry. The representative remained polite. Mr. Brooks would like to meet with you personally. The call ended. Sarah barely slept that night. Her mind raced endlessly. Why would Daniel want to see her? Had there been a mistake? Was he going to lecture her? Offer feedback? Reject her in person? Nothing made sense. The next morning she arrived at the company headquarters. The receptionist recognized her immediately. Good morning, Sarah. Sarah smiled nervously. Morning. You can go right in. Sarah followed the instructions. Her heart pounded with every step. Finally, she reached Daniel's office. A secretary opened the door. He's expecting you. Sarah entered. Daniel sat behind a large desk. He smiled warmly. Sarah. Good morning, sir. Please sit. She obeyed. For several seconds, neither spoke. The suspense felt unbearable. Finally, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. Sir. Daniel looked up. Yes? Why am I here? A small smile appeared on his face. I thought you'd ask that. Sarah waited. Daniel opened a folder. Inside were interview notes, performance reports. Evaluation sheets. He slid the folder across the desk. You scored higher than every other candidate. Sarah blinked. What? You heard me? She stared at him. But. She couldn't even finish the sentence. Daniel nodded. Because of the comment. Sarah looked down. Yes. Daniel leaned forward. Do you know why I asked you to come back? She shook her head. Because skills are easy to find. Sarah listened carefully. Degrees are easy to find. He continued. Experience is easy to find. Then he paused. But self-awareness? He shook his head. That's rare. Sarah stared at him. Daniel continued. When you realized you were wrong, you had a choice. She remained silent. You could have lied. Another pause. You could have blamed someone else. Another pause. You could have pretended it never happened. Sarah remembered all those options. She had considered every one of them. But you didn't. Daniel smiled. You took responsibility. The room became quiet. Emotion filled Sarah's chest. Not because she was getting a job, because she was learning something she would never forget. Daniel pulled out another document, then placed it on the table. Sarah looked down. Her eyes widened. It was an employment contract. Regional Operations Manager. She stared at it, speechless. Daniel smiled. Congratulations. Tears filled her eyes. Sir, her voice cracked. I don't know what to say. Daniel laughed softly. Then don't say anything. Sarah wiped her eyes. But after everything I said, Daniel nodded. Yes. Why would you still hire me? The answer came instantly, because Daniel had already thought about it long before she asked. Because mistakes don't define people. The room fell silent. Daniel continued. What defines people is what they do after the mistake. Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks. For the first time in years, she wasn't emotional because of success. She was emotional because of growth. Months later, she became one of the company's most respected managers. Years later, she became a mentor. And every time new employees joined the company, she told them the same story. Not because she was proud of it, but because she never wanted anyone to repeat her mistake. She would always end with the same words. The person you underestimate today may be carrying a lesson that changes your life tomorrow. And every single time she told that story, the room became silent. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment "respect" below. Share this story with someone who needs the reminder that appearances can deceive, but character always reveals the truth. Until next time, remember, treat everyone with respect, because you never know who is standing in front of you or what they have overcome to get there.